Amen.
Again, as I made mention to you during the announcements, that next Sunday night, Lord willing, we'll do question and answering. That's a time where we can allot for Sunday night some of your questions you may have, and if you would like to submit a question, if I don't get to it this month, I will get to it next month, Lord willing. And so tonight's really lesson is dealing with what I call tough questions from the book of Job. Again, tough questions from the book of Job. And there we go. Tough. All right. So Job to me is one of my is my favorite book in the Old Testament. I think it's so practical in the sense of its application and questioning and looking for answers. And who doesn't have a, not Job-like, but have a touch of suffering, misfortune, something in their lives where we would like to know the answer to, but we never find that answer to it. If you recall, in Job chapter 1, verse 1, it talks about Job's character first. Before he's the richest of all those to the east, before his wealth and what his wealth consists of, it talks about his character, what kind of person. He was blameless, he was upright, he shunned evil, he feared God. This is what we need to know the most about Job. And then we have, beginning in verse 6, this heavenly court where the angels are permitted to be with God, and God being among them, and Satan in our Bibles, but if you'll see the footnote, the adversary, it comes before them. And God asks him, "Where have you come from?" "I've been going to and fro." And then God presents to the adversary about his servant Job. He knows about Job. And then we see these two rounds of attacks that God permits that the adversary, Satan, can do, but with some stipulation. The first round, you can do anything you want to with your power, but you cannot touch him. He was unable to do that. The second one, you can strike him with an illness, but it cannot be fatal. And he did that. Obviously, he went as far as he could within the bounds that God permitted him. And then we see Job's three friends, Bildad, Zophar, and Eliphaz, coming. And they sat down with their friend and sat in silence for 7 days, not saying anything, observing in sackcloth and ash the grief of their friend and what he was going through. And then we get Job's statement in chapter 3, and then we see these rounds of debates and arguments until God comes and resolves it all with what he has to say. With all that being said, we see these tough questions from this book, and in this book given us from looking at things that we don't really have, for some of them, we don't have all the answers to completely, because we're not God. But understanding what we do know from what Job experienced does help us in our life today. Question 1 is this: does man serve God for nothing? Do we serve God for nothing? If you go and look with me in Job chapter 1 and verse 6. "Now there was a day when the sons of God, the angels, came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. And the Lord said to Satan, 'From where do you come from?' Satan answered and said, 'From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking back and forth on it.' Then the Lord said to Satan, 'Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless, upright man who fears God, shuns evil?' So Satan answered the Lord and said, 'Does Job fear God for nothing?'" Satan is giving an attack on us as people. You have a servant, Job, and Job loves you. But let's consider who Job is. Job is a man, yes, you say these things, but he's also, and Satan views it, he's a man that's been tremendously blessed by you. You have given him tremendous wealthy gifts. Because Satan goes on to say, "Have you not made a hedge around him, around the household, around all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, the possessions have increased in the land." He has gifts. He has blessings. You've given him these things. And so when you look at that question, does Job fear God for nothing? That is a question for us all. Do people serve God for nothing? You know, really, you look at that question, the approach to that, the response is the idea that no one, as Satan feels like, no one at this time, including Job, serves God with noble traits. In other words, he questioned our faith to God, that our faith was contingent upon something that God has done for us. God does these good things for us, and Satan saw Job as God pointed Job out. He knew who Job was, because he was well of his wealth and what he had possession-wise. You see the skewed look at the devil and how he looked at things. He did not believe that someone would serve God if God didn't give them anything. Which is a great question to entertain, isn't it? Let me ask you something. Would you be here doing what you're doing if the only thing God did for you was provide Jesus where we could be saved? That's it. I mean, you're praying for your loved ones. Forget it. God's not going to consider that. You need wisdom for a decision about to make. Forget it. God's not going to answer that. Now, obviously, God is very giving and He's very generous, and we understand those. But that's an interesting question coming from Satan, looking at people and thinking about it. And you think about even on television how that's unfold for a lot of people, the prosperity gospel. You give us this great contribution, then God will bless you and help you. I've shared this before, but on my way back from Free Hardeman going to Brownsville from Henderson at nights after taking a class in my master's program, it was the same on the talk show station. The same guy I can know his name, Pastor Owens, and he would always say he always mentioned glaucoma, high blood pressure, this or that. Put your hand on the radio, and he prayed this prayer, and I wonder, why do you keep mentioning this if you prayed it and it should be healing? You keep mentioning glaucoma and high blood pressure every single week. And it continued to pray this prayer. This idea of God doing this for you and you receiving, therefore you are faithful and follow God. Obviously the assumption is coming from an evil source, that being of the devil. And we see with Job that when God permitted the devil, Satan, the adversary, to do what he would do, not take his life, after all that Job experienced, it's that profound statement, to me, one of the most beautiful statements in a time of tragedy, where he says, the Lord gave, the Lord takes away. He doesn't know about Satan. He doesn't know about this debate, heavenly debate. He doesn't know that the devil trying to prove his point through Job, that no one's going to serve him for nothing. He doesn't know any of those things that we know as readers. But he still makes that statement, the Lord gave, the Lord takes away, blessed be the name of the Lord. Powerful. You think about also Satan's question, the allegation that God is unworthy of our devotion. God is unworthy of our praise. And the being is that if He doesn't bless us, if He doesn't answer our prayers way we are praying for it, if we don't receive the wisdom like we think we should receive at the time that we want it, then somehow the Lord is not deserving our devotion. And Job really became a model at this particular time of humanity to demonstrate that otherwise, that's false, that's an accusation, that's not true. And Job is one of that. God is worthy to be praised. Whether we have a good income or not, God is worthy to be praised. Whether we have a big family or not, God is worthy to be praised. Whether we live in a land of prosperity or not, God is worthy of praise. Period. And so as we see this question unfolding, which would really set the stage of what would transpire, how his friends took it, because they believed Job did something wrong, therefore God is punishing him, which is not the case. Job's faith is what led him into this situation, to prove to the accuser of just how evil and wrong he was, and how strong and faithful Job was in his faith to God. The second question is this, and it's a tough one. Why do righteous people suffer? When you think about what had the first round of attacks, and Job making that statement in verse 21 as was read for us, and then the second round of attacks by the devil when he plagued his health and he was in tremendous amount of pain and suffering physically because of what the devil and how he struck him with all his might as he could within the strict boundaries. You can't take his life. Again, the limitations that even the devil has with God. But look what it says in verse 10 in chapter 2. But, here is Job's wife speaking to him. And again, people are hard on Job's wife. We don't know her name, but yet she lost two, didn't she? She lost the 10 children. Now, one of the hardest things as a minister is to do a funeral service for a child that has passed away. It's difficult. The family want to know answers. They're in grief. They don't know why. Something is precious and innocent. They don't understand. And it's hard to be in that moment to provide comfort when it's so difficult in that situation. But can you imagine someone losing 10 children in one day? For the day before, knowing all your children are well, everything is fine. The very next day, they're gone. Period. All taken away. She's grieving as well. And I would say to anybody, even a preacher, if they're condemning Job's wife, what she had to say, even though the idea Job won't curse you and not, Job will not sin against you, try losing all your family, all your children. If you have 10 children and one day, and how would you feel? It's a little perspective. But anyway, she said what she said. She said, are you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die. And Job said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women speak. Shall we indeed accept good from God, and shall we not accept adversity? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Job didn't have the story of Jesus coming and suffering and dying. He wasn't privileged for that. He had what he understood in the patriarchal period, in the time that he lived in, and understanding that. And so as we think about what he had to say, it reminds us of what Jesus said, that it rains on the just and the unjust, a part of this world that we live in, that I want you to think about the struggles that we continue to have with this question in the 21st century. Why do bad things happen to people that presumably we think are good? They're righteous, they're faithful, they're believers, they're trying to do their best. Why is that? There was a Greek poet by the name, philosopher, Epicurus, who's really the one who's credited with this argument that God cannot be all-powerful and all good. In other words, he was saying if God is all good, then why would he allow suffering? Why would suffering take place? What is the good in someone being afflicted without doing anything to cause them to go through that affliction? What is the good in that situation? He also would say if God is all powerful, then why doesn't he look at all the evil and just wipe it out, erase it? Which he did in Genesis, right? Genesis 7 and 8 with the flood. Wiping it out, but also looking at why is that? Why would God not do that? Well, that's obviously a flawed philosophical idea. First of all, you look at the scriptures itself, we know that God is all-powerful. And whether your life is good, as you define what good is, and that's a very vague term, whether you think it's right, whether you think it's good, is not contingent upon who God is, what God is characteristics, how great he is. It's not based on any of those things. And so we must understand that God is who he is, and who he says he is, that we find. But it's also this, we must understand God gave us the freedom to choose. And the best way that helps me to understand this as being a parent of 3 boys, I want my 3 boys above anything else to follow God. I don't care if they're a trash collector. I don't care if they're an architect. I don't care if they're an entrepreneur. I don't care if they're a teacher. Really be great if they're a preacher, but I don't see that happening now. Any of these things, as long as they serve God. And as hard as it is, and you know this as parents and grandparents, I can't make that choice for them. I can't make that choice for them, and that hurts. Because I know from my family the side where someone chooses not to. And the pain that comes from my parents. Someone not choosing to do that. There's all kinds of reasons and variables and situation, but when it comes down to it, simply this: you choose to or choose not to. There's no in between with that. There's no I'll think about it. You just made a choice, didn't you? Whether we choose to follow God and His will and accept that. And so, to me, when God created us, and just as parents want to have a child, we want our children to grow and be productive citizens, that doesn't always mean they're going to do that. Look at the first family. There was no major temptations like there are today. There was no other families that they could look at and say this was a bad example. They were the originators, but look how they turned out. One brother kills the other brother out of jealousy and anger. That's not how they were raised. That's not how they were brought up. But that's what was done. As we think about what God has done for us, we understand when I think about His role as a creator, wanting us to freely come to Him, to love Him openly, in a sense that we come without any constraints, without being forced to. But for that to happen, there has to be that choice that you choose not to do. And obviously, we're reaping the consequences of it. You know, every decision, as we think about it, we cannot have free will if we cannot choose either or. And God is good, and He wants us the very best in us. He doesn't want anyone to perish. And if someone says, if God's so good, then why did He create a place called hell? They need to read Matthew. In Matthew chapter 25, and understand hell was created and made for the devil and his angels. Period. Those who choose to go there is based on their decisions and choice. God permits us to suffer the consequences of our bad consequences too. Every decision, good or bad, produces the same results. We would not be motivated to choose good or evil over evil. When I think of also Epicurus and what he had to say, the argument that suffering is not compatible with God's goodness, that how can anything good come from something that is negative, that is bad? And obviously this was prior to the life of Christ, that we could say that afterwards, after the event, that we look to the cross. Can you say with what Jesus went through, was there anything good about that? Can you read the mistrial, not the mistrial, the terrible trial of Jesus, the scourging, the flogging, the twisting of the crown of thorns, the suffering for 6 hours, and mocking and crying and mocking Him and cursing Him and denying Him? Was there anything of those things? Are those good things? Would any civilization in this world today say that's something very good? No. But let me ask you, something so evil and horrible and terrible, did something great come from that? Yes. We wouldn't be here, would we, without what Jesus went through, a bad, terrible situation, and the outcome of that was glorious. We have salvation. We can even talk about forgiveness and God's plan and what God has done for us and what God has provided for us in that. And so God allowing Jesus to suffer and then what came through that suffering. We see with Paul what Paul learned as he asked 3 times for the thorn in the flesh in 2 Corinthians chapter 12 to be removed. But then he learned this statement, when I am weak, I am strong in Christ. Let me ask you something. Would he understand that if God removed the thorn after the first time asking for that? I don't think so. Sometimes in our life, we understand something better when we go through it the hard way, the difficult way. We understand what it means, no means. We understand what healthy boundaries mean. We understand what you reap, what you sow means in our life. It's so important for us to understand the lessons that can come from that. That's why I love Romans 8:28. It's God whom we serve that can take something and work it for the good. He continues to do that over and over. But I also say about suffering is this: it's our responsibility as people. When God created the world, and it ends in verse 30 and 31 of Genesis 1, he said as he looked at everything, it is very good. Guess what was not involved in Genesis 1? Suffering was not in Genesis 1. Sadness was not in Genesis 1. Sin was not in Genesis 1. When sin entered the world, suffering took place. Suffering from personal sin, suffering from others, suffering from the disobedience and the consequences of others. Paul reminds us in Romans chapter 5 that death spread to all because of sin. And all of creation was affected by that sin. And the flood came about because of the greatness of that sin. And so it's not an easy answer to look at, and there's multiple ways to think about that. And so I would disagree with the poet in what he had to say, and the philosopher, because obviously this was BC, before what Jesus has done for us. God through Jesus shows us that through our corruptness, our evil, our disobedience, our sin, that he brought about salvation. He brought about the way where we can be with God. The third question in closing is this: who is man to judge God? Job questioned. He questioned the way God was governing the earth. His friends questioned Job because of his character. Again, they are of the opinion that if something bad is happening to you, then you're being punished. If something's good happening to you, then God is rewarding you. That's not always the case. And Job is an example of that. In Job chapter 13 and verse 17, just a snippet of his questioning, he says, "Listen carefully to my speech and my declaration with yours. See, now I have prepared my case." He wanted so desperately to present his case to God. For God, in some courtroom display, that God would come and as defendant he would plead his case, and he felt that he would win the case. That's how surely he was. He goes on to say, "I know that I shall be vindicated. Who is he who will contend with me? If now I hold my tongue, I perish. Only 2 things do not do to me, that I will not hide myself from you. Withdraw your hand from me, and let not the dread of you make me afraid. Then call, and I will answer, and let me speak, and you will respond to me. How many are my iniquities and sins? Make me know my transgression and the sin. Why do you hide your face and regard me as your enemy? Will you frighten a leaf driven to you and fro? Will you pursue dry stumble? For you have write bitter things against me, and make me inherit the iniquities of my youth. You have put my feet in the stocks, and watched closely in all my paths, and set a limit of the soles of my feet. Man decays like a rotten thing, like a garment that is moth-eaten." He's careful on that ledge. You notice that? Put away, so I don't dread you, that I'm not afraid, that I can present myself to you. If I've really done something to deserve all this, let it be known so that I can be aware of it. I don't know what it is. You see, he didn't understand what was happening behind the scenes. God would come to his servant, in a mighty whirlwind in Job chapter 38 and 39 and 40, and he hurled a lot of questions at Job, and he wanted Job to be humbled, and he was humbled, because Job did not understand an instant, a millisecond. He did not know what it's like to be God. Neither do we. And it just cringes me when people get on that ledge to assume, well, if God is God, then that's a faulty statement. A, you can't be God. B, you're not God. C, you have no clue what it's like to be God. And so it's two different things. We are creation, he's creator. And so to assume that God, if he's going to be God, then he has to meet these conditional statements, where does that put us? That puts us almost judging God. Who are we to judge God? Job was humble. He didn't know a single thing about what was happening before creation when the sons of God, the angels, were declaring the glory of God. He had no idea of these things, about some of the things that God created of the creatures, the Leviathan, the behemoth. He didn't know any of these. He didn't have a clue about how all this operated. He didn't know what it was like to be God. God humbled his servant, and Job did the most important thing. He listened and he learned. And he said, I know that I can do no things, and that no plan is withheld from your sight. We must learn the same. We're not going to know why to everything. I know sometimes that's a hard thing to swallow. Why did this happen? Why is this happening in my life? Why am I going through this, God? And Job to me speaks to me because he, as far as I know, that's not written. He was never told why. God never told him why. He never gave the benefit to Job. This is why this was taking place. I trusted and believed in you, and you're so faithful, and I was using you to disprove the lies of the father of lies, the devil. But he didn't do that. He didn't say that. What he wanted Job to know is what. And the what is God. The what is who God is. The what is what God does. The what is the boundaries that God has in this life, and what God continues to do, and that there's nothing that overthrows God and it goes against his will, that his will will be done. Whether we fully understand all the details or not, it's not for us to know everything. I know that's hard with the age of the internet and information and all we can look to. It's not for us to know everything. But there'll be no such thing as trusting. There'll be no such thing as having faith and trusting and leaning on someone and not our own understanding. See, Job in the patriarchal age was so long ago, but yet it's a part of the fabric of our society today. People have left the church because something bad has happened to them, and they don't know why. They want to blame God. People that won't come to church because something bad is happening or bad things are happening as they're observing this, and they just don't see how, and they push themselves away from God. We're reliving over and over what the devil thinks of us and continues to think, even though he was thwarted by Job, of us and accusing us. That we're not going to serve God without God doing something. That we're going to complain why want to know why to something when we don't have the answers to why, and even put ourselves in positions to where we foolishly get on the edge as people and put God on the hot seat, put God in the stand and prosecute against him, thinking that we know what's best when we don't. We never do. Folks, let me tell you something. We do well just to get our life in order. How in the world can we get the world's life in order? We can't. So in closing, I just want to remind ourselves, we think about questions and these tough questions coming from this book and how it pertains even to us today. The challenge is for all of us. Some days we might know the reasons, and there'll be some things we may not. But at the end of the day, it comes down to trusting in God and putting our faith in Him and believing that God will do as He promised, and God is taking care of the rest. I've just got to make sure that Josh is taking care of Josh, and Josh is following the example that's been laid for us. The artist selected the appropriate song. We're going to stand and sing. And if we can help you in any way, the invitation of our Lord is offered to us all to meet the needs spiritually that we may need. Prayer, praying over you, asking for wisdom, praying for you to be forgiven in a public manner. Or maybe there might be someone here who hasn't made that first important step into Christ. We are here to help. Together we all stand and sing.